Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service from Alaska region on behalf of a special partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Friday, January 6th, 2022. If you'd like additional weather information, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. You can bring up a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska, Hawaii lower left, and if you point and click anywhere on that map, it'll bring up a weather forecast with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories for anywhere in the country. The focus of the weather this Friday afternoon continues to be in the western states. California under the gun, various high wind advisories, flood watches, flood warnings, winter storm warnings. There will be a series of storms moving through the west there this weekend into the early and middle part of next week. So it's going to remain a very active weather pattern there through the middle of January. Well, this afternoon, Friday, we have the full wolf moon of January. That actually occurred 2:08, 2:09 p.m. this Friday afternoon. And about 24 hours ago, a sunspot group that is now emerging on the lower left limb of the sun produced a low-end X-class solar flare. So this is a very potent sunspot that could produce additional X-class flares as it rotates into view next week and next weekend. The thing we're watching weather-wise is the potential for some areas of locally dense fog developing here tonight into early Saturday morning across portions of south central Alaska. Overall, we're going to see some cooler temperatures set up along the west and northern portions of the mainland as we head into mid-month, with stormy and very wet conditions continuing across the western continental U.S. centered on California. And here again, the full wolf moon of January occurred this afternoon, shortly after 2 p.m. Alaska Standard Time. And here's that X-class flare that popped off just over 24 hours ago. So as this sunspot group rotates into view, that will happen as we go through next week into next weekend. And if there are any significant flares from that sunspot group, it could lead to some very disturbed geomagnetic activity and perhaps a very brilliant aurora display. So stay tuned to later forecasts. Thanks to NASA's Solar Dynamic Observatory for capturing that X-class flare. Well, looking at the webcams across the state, we're just going to take a quick check at a couple of them. McGrath has been kind of socked in much of the day with some freezing fog or ice fog, temperature at 4 above. Juneau, light snow and fog at temperature at 35. Juneau area picking up an inch or two of wet snow. That snow spreading further northward up towards Skagway and Haines in the late afternoon and early evening, and also back toward Yakutat as a initial wave of energy rotates back westward and will be impacting areas along the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak here as we go through later Saturday and in early Sunday. Well, at least there are no advisories or warnings currently in effect, but keep in mind with that potential for some ice fog forming tonight into early Saturday morning, there could potentially be an advisory for fog for areas of the Kenai, perhaps Anchorage Bowl, lower Matsu Valley. Again, if that fog forms, but it certainly looks possible given the setup that we have here. Very light winds from the surface to aloft with clear skies and temperatures that'll be cooling down to the dew point. Well, looking at the satellite imagery, you can see the curl in the clouds there in the lower right side of the screen, and that's a stronger low that's causing that front to be flung up across the panhandle. There's a couple of fronts there, and then there's like 3-4 lows back toward the lower Bering Sea along the central western Aleutians, and also south of there. There are the cluster of lows out there toward the west in the lower left quadrant of your screen. And then if you look to the lower right, there's the low. It's well off the west coast of the continental U.S. with a couple of fronts that are being pulled back up across Haida Gwaii, and then the leading edge of that now passing up toward approaching Yakutat, and then a weak low up there along the Chukchi Sea coast. Around Kivalina. And some blowing snow continues, especially out over the ice there along the Arctic coast, but the winds are not nearly as strong as what they were a day or so ago. And into tonight, there could be some patchy light snow, especially along the south side of the Brooks Range, along the Yukon River. Fairbanks could pick up an inch or two of snow with locally higher amounts as you get up the upslope flow there on the Dalton Highway toward Anatuvik Pass. But otherwise, the rain will continue out there across the Gulf with those couple of areas of low pressure, and then kind of a mix of rain and snow along areas of the central and western Aleutians with those low pressures out there. And the overall main storm track is going to stay south of Alaska, down in the Pacific, taking aim right toward the continental U.S. west coast. But otherwise, very weak high pressure out over the Yukon back toward northwest Canada and the interior of British Columbia, Alberta. For the interior, once the little bit of light snow gets by, pretty quiet weather through the weekend, though temperatures may cool down a little bit here as we get into next week. That one front is backing up all the way past Cook Inlet to the west arm of the Alaska Range, with a couple of lows riding just south of the Gulf of Alaska, and then a few lows extending from the North Pacific up to just north of the central into the western Aleutians. Low temperatures will be above freezing in the Panhandle, mid and southern Panhandle, near freezing as you go north. Quite cold up there at Glen Ellen, 18 below. There could be some ice fog there as well, including areas around the Anchorage Bowl, say Willow, Eagle River, down towards Soldotna as well. And then Saturday highs stay near or below zero in the Copper River Basin. Try to get back up into the teens across the Anchorage Bowl. Maybe back up above freezing there at Kodiak at 34, mid-40s, Craig, Sitka. And then lows Sunday morning, not quite as cold there at Glen Ellen, still 4 below. And we're looking at temperatures otherwise to be generally in the 30s to lower 40s there Sunday afternoon across the Panhandle, maybe back up into the 20s at Anchorage and Talkeetna, about 25, 26 degrees. Unfortunately, data did not come into the far north. All I can say is that temperatures have generally been running in the single digits to around 5, 10 below. Could be a bit colder in areas that have clearing tonight. And then Saturday afternoon, temperatures are generally going to be in the single digits above and below zero along the Yukon River North Slope, a little milder into the mid-teens along surrounding Norton Sound, south and west side of the Seward Peninsula. Same thing Sunday afternoon. Daytime highs generally single digits above and below zero out through the east central interior, with highs mid-teens surrounding Norton Sound. And then going down through areas of the southwest interior, single-digit lows to a bit below zero, especially McGrath northward, and then highs only in the lower teens or so as you go up the Yukon and Kuskokwim basins, and then temperatures below zero Sunday morning in the interior, afternoon highs above freezing as you get out along the Alaska Peninsula and in through the Aleutians. Temperatures a little below normal in the west, going toward mid-month, above normal in the southeast, below normal precipitation in the west, centered on Nome and Kotzebue, and then much above normal precipitation over California.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's look at your aviation weather if you have a flight plan this weekend, Saturday or Sunday. There are going to be a few things going on. Low pressure will be riding along the lower Gulf, North Pacific interface with a front pushing westward across from the Panhandle, sweeping into the western Gulf here as we go through the latter half Saturday into Sunday. A few areas of low pressure interacting with the central western Aleutians from the North Pacific up into the Bering Sea. And then a general trough of low pressure along the west side of the mainland on through the spine of of the Brooks Range, and there's going to be some lower ceilings and some patchy light snow work there. It's way up through the Yukon Valley here, especially early Saturday. Widespread IFR conditions expected there across a good portion of the interior along the Yukon River on up through the Brooks Range and along the west coast. Also hints of IFR there in the southeastern Gulf and a pocket there in the northern Panhandle Saturday morning. Still IFR conditions rather pervasive Saturday afternoon across North Slope, Brooks Range, north of the Yukon River, back through the Seward Peninsula, and then along the Kuskokwim Bay back toward Nunavik Island and St. Matthew, continuing there in the southeastern Gulf. And Sunday morning, still IFR conditions there, the northwest quadrant of the mainland, back along the YK Delta through Nunavik Island and St. Matthew. Pockets of IFR, west side of the Alaska Range, off to the north and east, up through the upper Yukon, Tanana valleys, and as well as areas of the southeast along the northern Gulf Coast into the northern Panhandle. And Sunday afternoon, IFR conditions expected to not be quite as extensive, diminish a bit. Still holding on, though, along the spine of the Brooks Range, areas of the North Slope and northwestern Arctic coast. Anatuvik Pass there in the north, as well as Adigan Pass, should generally see IFR conditions prevail Saturday. As I mentioned, lower ceilings and some patchy light snow moving through there, especially early in the day. Lake Clark and Merrill further south and west, west arm of the Alaska Range. Generally, VFR conditions are expected and rounding up there through central Alaska Range. VFR at Rainy Pass. Windy Pass may see some MVFR conditions along the north entrance there early, giving way to VFR. Isabel Pass, same thing, MVFR conditions along the north entrance, but giving way to VFR during the day Saturday. Mentasta Pass, further south and west to Tanita, as well as Portage Pass, should see VFR conditions on Saturday. And then in the far northern Panhandle, Chilkoot and White, we'll see IFR conditions linger there, at least early this weekend. For Saturday morning, the freezing levels, the surface freezing line will run from the central Bering to between St. Matthew, St. Paul, off the southwest coast, across the Alaska Peninsula, along the east side there of Kodiak Island and the Kenai Peninsula, northern Gulf, and then into the inner channels of the Panhandle. And freezing levels aloft, upwards above 2,000 feet there in the Panhandle, rising to near and above 4,000 feet, southwest corner of the Panhandle, including Heidelberg down through Haida-Gwaii. And the greatest threat for icing will exist over areas of the Gulf and the outer coastal areas of the Panhandle above 4,000 and above 6,000 feet in association with that front pulling back toward the west-northwest. And then another area of moderate icing possible south of the central and eastern Aleutians above 4,000 feet. And then in the far north, we're looking at some isolated moderate icing above 1,000 and above 2,000 feet, especially along and north of the Yukon River. As far as stronger upper-level jet stream winds, not too impressive for this time of year. Southwest flow from south-central mainland up along the Alcan border, 60 to 85 knots, bringing it down to 700 millibars, around 9,000 feet. Strongest winds coming in from the south there across the Panhandle in through the central areas, upwards of 40 to 55 knots. Also some winds of 40, 45 knots out there over the central and lower Bering Sea, extending down into the eastern Aleutians. And then at 3,000 feet, winds aloft, strongest there along the outer Panhandle coast, upwards of 45 to 60 knots. Also a broad area of 40 to 50 knot winds circulating around below there in the southwest quadrant of the Bering. The greatest threat for turbulence will be along areas of the Panhandle and the outer coast, surface to 6,000 feet, the north central Gulf south of Cordova, and in there through the entrance of Cook Inlet, surface to 4,000 feet, and then back out toward the eastern and central Aleutians from the surface to 3,000 feet. So if you do have a flight planned, I hope you're able to get off the ground and have a safe one.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen and actually collapse, we're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles in nests to respond to conservation measures. But threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected. The nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the U.S., we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well: biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, the team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and we'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to our marine weather segment and looking at the sea ice edge. Extensive sea ice throughout the northern portions of the state along the Arctic coast, Chukchi Sea coast, and in and around the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. A little bit of a plenia has opened up there west of Gyadvik. Winds are not quite as strong as what they were along the Arctic coast the past couple of days. They've come down a bit, having been up around 30 knots or so out of the east. Along the southwest coast, the ice continues to press west and southward. So again, still thinking is that the ice could make it to near St. Matthew at some point early next week. And we continue to have ice there in and around Bristol Bay and up into Cook Inlet. Though it was initially disturbed by some of the winds that happened just prior to Christmas there in Upper Cook Inlet. But in the meantime, winds are going to pick up. We're looking at some gale force winds of 35 to 45 knots, especially the outer coast of the Panhandle, where waves could run in excess of 20 to 25 feet. For the inner channels, winds will be southeast 25 to 35 knots, gust as high as 40 knots. Waves 5 feet Petersburg, upwards to 13 feet Dixon Entrance, 5 feet with northwest winds to 30 knots there in Lynn Canal. North winds will press a little further south on Sunday, 25 knots, gust to 40 knots. Petersburg, waves generally 5 feet from the mid-channels up through Lynn Canal. Southeast winds 20 knots, 4-foot waves there, Dixon Entrance and the outer coast. Winds could still be upwards of 25 to 30 knots from Sitka off to the north and west, where waves could be running as high as 20 to 27 feet west of Yakutat. Across the northwestern Gulf, strongest winds on Saturday will be at the entrance there of Cook Inlet out of the north at 30 knots with 11-foot waves. Prince William Sound, 20-knot northwesterly winds with 4-foot waves. North winds to 25 knots off the Kenai coast with waves of 8 feet. And then on Sunday, winds could generally be in the 25 to 30 knot range, especially out over the open waters of the Gulf from the east-northeast with waves running 12 to 14 feet. Entrance of Cook Inlet, north winds 25 knots, waves 10 feet, falling off to northerly 10-knot winds there in upper Cook Inlet where there's ice in place. And then for Saturday across Kodiak Island, 25 to 30 knot northeast to north winds, 6-foot waves Shelikof Strait, 8 to 12 feet on the North Pacific side, northeast winds out of Bristol Bay, 15 knots with waves there of 2 feet. On Sunday, winds will generally be out of the north-northeast across the region, though as high as 30-35 knots around and south of Kodiak Island with waves of 10 to 14 feet, and northeast 20 knots out of Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay with waves of 4 to 6 feet. The Aleutians will see winds as high as 35 knots there between Atka and Nikolsky. Out of the south-southeast, waves 14 to 18 feet on the North Pacific side, 7 to as high as 13 feet on the Bering side, and winds come down across the central eastern Aleutians on Sunday. Look for east to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots through the eastern half of the Aleutians. Waves generally running 15 to 16 feet on the North Pacific side and 6 to as high as 13 feet on the Bering side. Ice is rather extensive on the southwest coast, extending up through St. Lawrence Island. East winds 5 to 10 knots out of Norton Sound. Generally 20-knot offshore flow off ice flow with 25-knot easterly winds and waves upwards of 16 feet St. Matthew. And then on Sunday, winds turn more north-northeasterly. North winds 15 knots Norton Sound. Generally 20 knots from the north-northeast over the ice and accelerating 25 to 30 knots St. Paul on up through St. Matthew with waves as high as 13 feet in the vicinity of St. Matthew. Along the Arctic coast, winds 20 to 25 knots out of the east, generally from Point Lay all the way eastward through Kaktovik with ice in place, and the winds a bit of a mixed bag, 15 knots to the lower Chukchi Sea, turning back toward the east, 20 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence. And for Sunday, winds will generally be out of the east-northeast, 15 to 20 knots along the Arctic coast, turning northwesterly 15 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea south of Cape Lisburne, and then turning northerly to 20 knots with the ice in place around St. Lawrence Island. So that wraps up your marine weather forecast here for this weekend, and be sure and have a pleasant weekend. Thank you for watching, and join us again tomorrow night.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.